I want to welcome you to another monthly webinar for the membership of the National Chimney Sweep Guild. This is presented every month by the CVC Success Group. And today, this is Jerry Eisenhower here, and I'm also have a co-presenter today in Cheryl Eisenhower. Cheryl, you here with me, ready to start and rock and roll with this?
I'm here and ready to go.
Okay, so today's webinar is on what we're going to entitle Employee Failure Syndrome. And I'm sure that if you're listening to this and you have a workforce, you have probably had employee failure in your career. It happens to all of us. So, what we're going to talk about today is some of the reasons why employees fail after being hired. Because there's nothing more disappointing than to hire someone, invest into them, train them, and find out that they fail for any number of reasons. So what we're going to do is investigate and discuss some of these today and hopefully give you some ideas about why employees fail. Now, let me tell you a little bit why I've selected Cheryl to work with me today on this webinar, because this is an area of expertise for them. Cheryl, tell them a little bit about your qualifications in your assessment processes and your coaching background.
Okay, as far as my coaching background, I'm a Ziegler certified coach and trainer. I got a lot of knowledge there that I've been able to put to use. I also am a DISC qualified assessor. I'm certified in that, and now I've received my certification in color coding.
So let's tell people a little bit, what do DISC and color code tell people about potential new hires and their existing workforce?
Okay, the one thing that it tells them is, especially the DISC, is working with your behaviors. It tells you who and what and how they think, how you can train them, how they want to be communicated with, which is 100% in my book. The worst problem out there is communication. So if you have knowledge of how to communicate with them, that's great. It's based on timing as of the moment. Now, color coding will tell you why. It goes into the motive. It goes into why people think the way they do. It works with your core value from your earliest memories in childhood. So it's two ends of the same spectrum, and they tend to work together to give you a picture of the people, how to communicate with them, how to train them, how to incorporate them, put them into the right seat, and make sure that they've got a chance before you get started.
Okay, so let's start off here. Cheryl, one of the things that you also do is you train people in how to do interviews with people. And we see that there's a lot of interviewing skills. How does someone conduct a successful interview, and also keeping in mind how you do it legally and comply with the rules and regulations that you have to operate under as an employer in this day and time?
It's changed a lot over the years. Used to, you brought somebody in, you asked them every question that you wanted to, and it was okay. If it worked, you hired them. Nowadays, there's so many questions that you can't ask about. You can't ask anything about age, about race, about their family, about any problems they have. It's gotten to where interviews now are very generic. You can't delve into anything. You can touch on, will they take a background check? Will they take anything? But you can't ask them why if they refuse.
Okay, so a lot of times I've noticed that you asked a couple key questions to get people to talk about themselves. What's a key question to ask an applicant that will get them talking about themselves?
Well, I found out the best question, the very first one, is tell me a little bit about yourself. People can volunteer anything, the stuff you can't ask. And so I like to have people talk. People like to talk about themselves. I found out that's the major thing. They'd rather talk about themselves than the people they know. So once you open up the discussion, they're wide open to give you any answer that you're actually looking for and not able to ask.
So interviewing is a lot of listening and not much talking. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much. My questions are very short, very direct, very to the point. I want their answers very wide open. I want them where they go. I don't ask any yes no questions. I ask for discussion questions.
Okay. And then after that, part of what you do in your process is you do assessment of them through use of the disc and the color coding. Tell me a little bit about what this tells you and how this can tell you that a person is going to be suited for the job that we're planning on training them for.
Well, I mean, anybody can lie on these tests. We'll give you that. Matter of fact, the only answer you get are the answers they give you. But most time I explain to them that I won't, if they're not truthful, then it's no use to take it. I can't help you. So, and that's what it's for, is to help them, is to help you put them in the right seat, but it's also to help them be able to explain to you without having to tell you how to work with them. They automatically will start answering them correctly because they want you to be able to work with them. And I found out that with the way you train people, the way you communicate with them, whether they're high D's, low D's, whether they're fast making decisions, whether they're a slow paced person, whether they're one of them's a high CS, you want them in positions of very minutia orientated things because that's the area they're best in. The higher D's and I's are better into the visionary sense.
Okay. So you're going to use this assessment to give you information about this person and how to reach them and what their behavior styles may suit them to do in the business. Am I correct?
That's what, yeah, and that's what works the best because once you get them into the wrong seat, Jerry, they're no good there. They're no help to you. They're fighting every day to do something that they don't want to do. And so if you can put them in the right seat, they enjoy it, then you've got an employee that will work with you and work in that seat as opposed to putting him where he doesn't belong.
Okay, now when you get a the disc assessment can be 70 pages or more. And a lot of times you may look at this front page that tells you some basic things about it, but then you've got your values and the other things. What all are in that in-depth disc assessment and who can understand what's in this disc and how to put it to work?
Well, before I go there, I'm going to give you the biggest problem with looking at a disc. When a person looks at their own, they see the colored bars and they pin themselves into that is what they are. And it's not always that easy to look at. Yes, you might be a low D and you sit there, you think, no, I can't make decisions, but you're one of the best decision makers out there. You've got to learn to understand all the other pages to understand how you fit. It's kind of like ingredients in a cake. You take a little of this, a little of that, and a little of this, you mix it all together and you come up with a person. And when you come up with that person, if you can look at these discs and tell exactly what each bar means, not what color it is and not what height it is, then you come up with the unique traits of that person.
Okay, so I reference this as selection of the right seed to grow a magnificent tree. Would you agree with my words in that?
They're pretty good. I like that. Yeah, you've got to grow them.
Okay, so now we've been through the process, and again, our whole concept here is to come up with processes that can prevent employee failure syndrome. The next stage of this is where one of our team members, Brandy Biswell, has a tremendous amount of expertise, and that is the onboarding. And the onboarding is done on the first day. And under Brandy's principles and Brandy's teachings, she goes through that onboarding can take over a half a day to do because what you're doing in the onboarding is you're explaining the company processes, the company procedures, the rules, the regulations, everything that we're going to be operating to. We're covering all the bases So we're preventing these questions from being wondered later on. We're addressing what the leave time is, what the sick pay, what the vacation time is, what their job expectations are. In this, we're also should be providing them with a job description. So how important do you feel that the onboarding process is to prevent employee failure syndrome?
I think it's more important than many employers look at. Many years ago, we just threw somebody in and let them deal with it, and they had to learn it on the step by step. But now we've learned that if you take that half a day or first 3 days, however many it takes for the position you're putting them in, and you onboard them in the correct way where they see the value, where they see the culture, where they see what you expect of them instead of trying to learn it on down the road, you can expedite getting them into the job without having all those weeks of failures.
Right. And so it's like if we hire a general manager for a company and one of our clients, we may go through a 6 week or onboarding process of the things that we're wanting this person to accomplish each and every day over that 6 week period. Now, you've been involved in hiring some general managers, which are management level people, and these are very intense interview processes. Would you agree with that?
They're probably the most intense because it's one of the most important seats. These are the people that are going to oversee and control the people in your businesses. And if you can't get them in properly, they're not going to be able to onboard any new employees you have or either take care of the ones you have. So to me, that's the most intricate. It's training your top-notch people, and they are the ones that will either make or break your company.
Okay. So next after that, in our process and what we recommend is a training curriculum drawn up to detail what you're wanting this person to learn and putting it forth in the steps of how they're going to become proficient in these various skills they're going to have to do. Because often there's going to have to be a learning curve. It's also known that training is easier than retraining. So even if you hire a experienced person, there's also a period of training to adjust to what your company does, the processes that you do, and to bring proficiency. Your goal is to make every employee on a scale of 1 to 10 a 10. And this is going to involve an investment into them in the training. Now, in today's world, training is now moved to a much easier accessible level because now via the internet, training can be beamed in and accessed via the internet. So do you see people are failing in their training and not preparing their people properly, which could be part of the employee failure syndrome we're talking about?
Well, let's take one step back and figure out how you and I learned stuff, Jerry. We learned it in small pieces over years, over time. Look at the mistakes we made. What if you can take this training and tighten it up and show these people the right way in a short period of time instead of all the failures? Number one, they're on your payroll now. So the less failure you can have on just the learning process is exponential in your bottom line.
Right. And in today's world, how important is accountability? Most people are not self-accountable, so it's part of the process in your mind that employers, managers must take the steps to hold their people accountable and keep them on track. Is that part of the management role, or is that a personal role that the employee should be holding themselves self-accountable in this day and time?
Well, my first thought is you should be accountable for your own self. But in today's time, as you mentioned, it's not like that anymore. And I'm going to use the millennial word. The millennials want to be held accountable. That's how they get from point A to B. That it's different than when we were younger. I mean, basically, we were held accountable by a stick. That's my dad helped me quite accountable by a hickory. So nowadays, your employees, you can't just expect them to do it anymore. It's not out there like it used to be. So do we have to do it? Yes, we do.
Okay, so we got to keep going with this. And in light of that, recently I had a client visit that I visited a client location, and they had an employee that was giving them some problems. So when I was there, I sat down and had a discussion. And I asked the employee, what does the company need? And the words he said to me were shocking. He said, Jerry, the problem is there's no accountability here. Nobody holds us accountable. And I said, so you're telling me that there's not enough beatings? He said, yeah, it's for me to be held accountable. Someone has to do it. I cannot hold myself accountable. And that's what we often find that contributes to the employee failure syndrome. It's the lack of the accountability, which goes down to a leadership issue. Now, you and I have put on some seminars in our careers dealing with the generational gaps. And since many of the people that are going to be hired today are going to be from the millennial age group, just like you said a while ago, they crave accountability. Is that not what we learned in our research?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna stick something in here. I think a lot of it goes back to their rearing. We didn't hold them accountable at that point. We let them do what they wanted to do. They were latch door kids. They went out on their own. Nobody was there to hold them accountable. And I think that's something that human nature has to have is accountability. And we didn't do it with them, so now they're looking for it.
Okay, so the next one is what I call nip it in the bud. And I get this from one of my favorite TV shows of all time, which was Andy Griffith. And on Andy Griffith, he had a deputy. His name was Barney Fife. And one day, Andy was having problems with Opie because Opie was a teenager now. And Barney told him, said, Andy, you gotta nip it in the bud. Now, what I'm referring to here, often I hear of employee failures. I hear a client call me and I'm going to have to fire someone, or someone just quit, or someone is going downhill. And the question I often ask is, when did this start? When was the starting phase of these issues? And what we often do is we don't recognize these problems and we let them build up to a high crescendo where the habits form. So Cheryl, do you agree with me that you've got to nip it in the bud?
Believe me, you need to nip it in the bud. The thing is, you've made a statement there. You said that we don't notice it. A lot of times people do notice it. They're just so afraid of losing that employee that they figure that they'll fix themselves. And so they let it go on instead of nipping it in the bud.
But that would be kind of like driving a car and expecting to fix itself when it's not running right and it's going to break down on the road one day, right?
They won't do that.
Yeah. So what you've got to do is, as a manager, you got to have that thought of nipping it in the bud, which means you're observing, you're tracking, you're measuring results, and you're holding accountability. Which takes us to the next failure that often happens. That is, it's one of the causes of employee failure syndrome, and that is the lack of employee reviews and coaching by management. In other words, we don't sit down and have the hard discussions with our people. We don't share with them. A lot of times we think they should know better, but they really don't. And we just assume they should know better, and we never take the action as the manager to coach them to excellence. Do you see this happening when people see employee failures that you witness, Cheryl?
It happens over and over. They get right to the very end before you sit back and you say, well, if I would have told them, if I would have coached them, I could have gotten them through this. Well, what's the old saying? A day late and a dollar short.
Yeah. So, and another one we want to cover, and this is going to be a specific age group because we are seeing people that are resigning from jobs, they are quitting jobs, and they're listing one of the new causes now is millennial stress syndrome. That's correct, millennial stress syndrome. And in preparation for this webinar, we did a little bit of research into what causes millennial stress syndrome. What's the causes? So I'm going to go down through here and list these causes, and I'm going to ask Cheryl what her thoughts are on this. Number one is their surroundings, the people they hang around with, the people that they listen to, the their people that they network with. This is where a lot of it is. We often say that people are a victim of the people that they hang around with. And I see this often where a great worker goes downhill because the outside influences of other people. So do you see that surroundings are a reason for failure and a cause of employee failure syndrome?
I do. I mean, the statement is you are what the five closest people to you are. And if you hang around with people that are having problems, you're going to have a problem. You hear it, you see it all the time, and you fall into that same trap.
Okay. The next one is the news. The news that's on every day. And today it is considered that many people are still affected by the 2016 presidential election you shared with me earlier today. That people, because Donald Trump was elected, they have had psychological issues with this ever since. Do you see this?
I see it, I hear it, and the fear is I'm afraid it's going to happen in 2020 also, because our electoral system and our news, and we're just sitting here over elections. We've got the new virus that's out now. We've got um, countries going to wars and things. And so all we hear is bad news. If the news media, and I mean, this would probably be a joke, if the news media would once in a while throw in something good, it might help counterbalance, but you never hear of good on the news.
It's just like today. We're sitting here and recording this in the midst of a presidential impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate. And all day long, this is what you see. But also, I want to say this. This isn't just millennials that have this issue. I know people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that their entire attitudes are affected. If you don't believe it, just look at your own timeline and what people are saying, your friends are saying out there. This is the effect of the news and what comes across that. So another issue is the lack of parenting when they were young, at a young age, and guidance. Coming many single parent homes. Many did not have a fatherly influence, or they didn't have a motherly influence, or they didn't have the guidance. In other words, there was no discipline in many homes that they were raised out of. And this an issue also that can cause employee failure syndrome, Cheryl?
It is an issue, but I want to say one thing. Sometimes a single parenting family is better because they have more discipline, because they have nowhere to run. We see parents, their children set them up against each other, mom against dad. And so there's that continual turmoil. It's family. It's You need to have a conductive family instead of one that's continually fighting. And when you see that after you've seen the news, you feel like you're in the same boat as everyone else.
Right. Another reason that's found for many people, not just millennials, a millennial stress syndrome is actually their eating habits, their lack of nutrition, overabundance of coffee, caffeine, and energy drinks. And that's actually referred to as the sustenance that they take in each day, and how this is having an adverse effect on their output, their productivity, their mindsets, and this also leads to employee failure syndrome. Gerald, what's your thoughts on this one, on the nutrition, the coffee, the energy drinks?
I'm going back up to decades ago. Decades ago. It got dark, we went to bed. It got light, we got up. We ate usually at least 3 meals a day. We ate food that came out of our gardens. We ate animals that were killed on the farms around us. We didn't have all the additives that people have. Coffee, you had time if you were lucky for one cup. Plus, it was different kind of beans back then. They didn't have all the additives in them. We do not have good, clean food to eat anymore. We don't have good habits of sleeping. We stay up late. We look at computers. The blue lights are causing a lot of problem. People see them right before they go to bed. They can't sleep. Just because you're in bed doesn't mean you're resting. So with all that going, even though you're in bed, you're not resting. And many of us, thank goodness I haven't had to yet, are taking things to make us sleep. Now, if you're taking something that make you go to sleep, there's several reasons. Number one, you've got too much on your mind. Number two, you don't have enough exercise to get you tired. There's reasons you sleep. It's to regenerate. We're not giving ourselves the reasons to regenerate anymore.
Okay. Another issue that causes employee failure syndrome, according to psychological studies, is now everyone has a smartphone connected to them at the hip. When the smartphone has gone away, we go into nervous conniptions when we can't get to our smartphones. The smartphone delivers us instant contact with those people that may have a bad influence on us. The smartphone delivers our news. So you think that smartphones today, with the capability of communication as we now have, are a part of employee failure syndrome?
I do, because you can never disconnect. It's always right there in your hand. And I actually read something yesterday that makes a lot of sense. One of the highest stress levels is when you see your phone battery going dead.
Mhm.
I mean, people, that's their world. They've got to have it in their hand. They've got to look at it every few minutes. They can't sit and have a conversation face to face. And I don't mean face to face over FaceTime. I understand that's important when you have families out of the country or out of town. But when your spouse is sitting next to you and both of you are sitting there looking at the phone, all you're getting is news. You're not communicating. I actually sit in a restaurant this morning and watched people. I'm a people watcher. And I looked around, and in that restaurant, over half the people in there had phones in their hands with their children and spouses across the table. And that's not good for the human nature of people.
Okay. And I want to retouch on this one again, and it kind of tied in before, but social media. What type of effect do you think social media has and plays in employee failure syndrome?
Well, you hear what everybody else is doing. You hear that the grass is greener on the other side. You see the negativity. You see people getting shot, use out there. And is that the easy way out? Are drugs the easy way out? You're looking at the media that is telling you, okay, if you take this, this, and this, the world's going to be great. If you eat this, this, and this, the world's going to be great. But look at people that are dieting. One diet says eat protein, no carbs. The next one says eat carbs. The next one says drink a lot of water. The next one says not. We are faced with so many decisions over social media that you honestly cannot make a decision anymore.
Right. Then again, I want to touch on this one again because I think this one is severe, which is the people they hang out with. You said earlier that you will assume the personality of the five closest friends you have. Is that correct, Cheryl?
That's what they're saying across the board.
So you've got to, these are the things that you can monitor and you can see this. And when you see an employee that one day he's on top and the next day it's almost like a different personality has come out, often this is going to be from the interactions he had or she had after work the day before. So you want to be watching these things. This is a lot of it. You've got to open your eyes. You've got to inspect inspect for what you expect with your workforce. It's not a matter of delving into their personal lives. It's a matter of, does their personal life affect your company, your profits, your productivity, and where your people can attain the highest levels of achievement? Cheryl, anything you would add with that?
I would, if we've got a few extra minutes, I've got a thought that I'd like to put out here. Years, decades, many decades ago, we had to worry about what we ate. We had to worry about a place to live. We had to worry about staying warm. Then there were houses. There were fires. And then there was meat accessible in the grocery store. We didn't have to hunt for food anymore. Actually, we don't even have to go to the grocery store. There's a McDonald's on every corner. So the world has taken away what we had to think about. Without that and the problems that we had back many years ago, I'm going all the way back to cavemen that had to find clothes. And then it's not important anymore. So now people don't have anything to think and worry about where to get their next meal, about what to do. All they have to think about is themselves or the guy on the other end of Facebook. You don't have the day-to-day living things you do. I mean, if you look around, we see people, it seems like the most well-to-do people are the worst stressed because they don't have to think about anything except themselves and what is going on in their world at the moment. I mean, if you ride by and look at homeless people, if you look at them, they're not stressed. They're probably the laid backest people in the world because what they've got to worry about is where are they going to get their next meal and where are they going to be warm for the night. They're not worrying about, does John like me? Does Jane like me? And I think along with all these other things that we've talked about, it's the conditioning that we have made the world where nothing that we really need is hard to get.
Right? So here's another thing they say that contributes to millennial stress syndrome, and that is gaming, Netflix, and television. Do you think these have an effect on people's performance, their attitudes, and their productivity, Cheryl?
You do because you get tied up in them, especially in the gaming. I mean, it's hard not to see somebody. I mean, I don't know how Candy Crush got to be what it is, but people would rather sit around and play games than talk. Movies, there's a lot of hate fighting movies. I admit I watch movies too, but I do it a lot of times to clear my mind. And if you look at it with those intentions, then it's not so bad, but you can't do it all the time. And with the accessibility of anything you want to see on TV, it makes it very hard not to think that these don't come into play. A lot of the series that we're seeing nowadays deal with the fact of alcoholism, with stress syndrome, with raising kids with nothing. And so, again, this is almost like a person in your life. You become part of this Netflix series that you're looking at. So, anything that you watch, anything you put into your mind is going to come out some way.
Okay, so our goal here was to dig into what we're calling employee failure syndrome. Is there anything else you would add before we would end this webinar?
The only thing I would add is open your eyes, see what's going on around you, and look at these employees as people that you need to hold accountable, that you need to help get where they want to go. And my number one thing would be ask your employee what their goals are and see if you can help them get there.
Yeah. What I would add into this is in this day and time, running a business is hard work. Managing and coaching people is a hard job. And what you're going to have to do to be successful is you got to come outside the comfort zone. You can't just say, yeah, I'm going to hire you, start Monday, and expect success. Unless you put together a program and a criteria and a curriculum that you want these people to follow and that you support wholly. Unless you're ready to manage your people, unless you're ready to assess them and coach them, Employee failure syndrome will continue to be a problem, and it will plague you, and it will cause chaos and frustration in your business and in your personal life. Cheryl, would you agree with that?
I agree. And one statement I'd like to make here is hold yourself accountable before you hold others.
Great words. And with that, we're going to end this month's edition of our monthly webinar produced by the CBC Success Group. And this is done exclusively for the membership of the National Chimney Sweep Guild. We want to thank you. It's an honor, it's a privilege, and it's a pleasure to be able to share our thoughts with you. And our goal is that these will assist you in getting to your business dreams. Talk to you next month. Appreciate you joining us.